everyone, Rob here from the Way Out West YouTube channel. Today I get to talk to John Sinclair, and although John is not what you could call a musician, he has been a part of the industry for well over 50 years, both as a manager of bands and artists and also as a major promoter. John's interview is fantastic. You'll hear lots of stuff about the music industry that you probably weren't aware of. John's also been a mate of mine since Way Out West started, having put many artists at our club. And he's also been a bit of a mentor for me as well. I really knew nothing when we started Way Out West. Probably don't know much now, but that's another matter. So sit back and enjoy the interview with John. Please hit the subscribe and like button, and we'll see you sometime soon at Way Out West. Bye for now. So John, can you tell us about your early life? Where did you grow up, and was music a part of your family life?
Yeah, I grew up in Sydney. I was born in 1948. My dad was a writer of children's books, and so we had a reasonably itinerant life. But mostly I grew up around the Cronulla area in Sydney and went to high school mostly in North Sydney. So finished high school in 1965. So Dad was a pretty crazy bloke, and Mum was the backbone of the family. She ended up being the cooking editor of the Woman's Weekly. So wrote lots and lots of very successful cookbooks. And younger brother, 15 months younger than me, and we're just the four of us, and very tight family, very happy family. Normal life.
Cool. Did you play an instrument in your early days at all?
Never had the discipline. 64, 65, when the Beatles happened, everyone had the dream of being in a band, but grew my hair. That's as far as it got,
And how did you get into the music business? I believe I was reading that you booked your first band back in 1968.
Yep. So I started 1966. I left high school. By the end of that year, I'd been transferred from Sydney to Melbourne with the job I was in. So there I was, 18-year-old bloke with a good job and a company car in Melbourne. And when that was on fire with all the bands playing, so every weekend I was at a gig, that's how you met girls. So Birdies, Sebastian's, Oprah's, Powerhouse, all the dancers. And so, pretty well that was what my social life was. And, then I got to meet a couple of musicians and hang out with them, and that was all good, and had a really good time. Then I got transferred back to Sydney in 68. And my brother and I, he was a really good footballer. We played rugby that year, and that finished in September. And we thought, well, what are we going to do? And I said, hey, why don't we start a dance? There's all these dances in Melbourne. There were none in Sydney. I said, why don't we start a dance, and then, we can make money and meet girls. Pretty made sense. So we rented a hall down at Cronulla. We lived in North Sydney, and that's 20 miles away, and but we knew people down there, and we had a lot of friends from like school years, etc. So that was good, and that was rented the hall and got it all together, and then we need a band. So I remember that I went to school with a guy that was in a band. So I went out to see them. They were okay. Yeah, they hired. And the week before the dance, which was in September 66, they called me and said, oh, we haven't got any transport, because they were up from North Sydney way. Can you drive us down? Well, I had a company station wagon. So I said, sure. So I drove them down. The dance was a big success. We did really well. Booked them again the following week and the following week, and drove them down each time. And then the cops closed us down. So we tried it again for another couple of weeks at a different hall, but it didn't work. But by then, people were talking about the band. And so they were getting other jobs in other dances. So I just kept driving them around on the weekend, and then started dropping by the agency and picking up the contracts, and then hanging around the agency. And that's what happened. October 68, a phone call came in, and the guy around the agency said, well, why don't you do this one? So I did. I booked a band called Clapham Junction for $77. 70 for the band and 7 for the agent. And the bass player was a guy called Peter Noble, who now was the guy who owns the Blues Fest Festival. So that's where it started. Then it went on from that. And then in February, or let me say, late December 68, Flying Circus released, the band was called Flying Circus, right? And they released a single. And by March, it was the #1 record in the country. And they said, we're going full-time. Do you want to go full-time and manage us? I went, sure. I can be Brian Epstein. I know how to do that. And that's how it started. And that year we had 3 #1s. And that was my career, you know.
Fantastic. I'll come back to Flying Circus because I've got a few questions about that. So you really have been prominent in the music industry for, well, 50 years. What's some of the other bands and artists that you've managed over the years? I know Xavier Rudd was one, I believe. And
yeah, again, well, that's the success of Flying Circus. I found another Sydney band called Autumn, and they were very successful. In fact, the 1970 Battle of the Sounds, Flying Circus came first, Autumn came third. I then took Flying Circus. They were the first band that won the Battle of the Sounds that went to America. So off we went, and we couldn't get visas to work in America, but we could in Canada. So ended up in Toronto. And I then took the guts of Autumn over there. I also took Greg Quill's Country Radio. Dingoes ended up there. Ended up taking 18 or 19 musicians and girlfriends over to Toronto between 71 and 77. Managed one Canadian band over there. And then I got, big decision, got married, where's my life going to be, all the rest of it. So I decided to come back to Australia. Of course, in those days, to be a good manager, you got your band work. And that was pretty well what I did. So I became a very good agent. Probably, if I look back at it, I was a much better agent than I ever was a manager. So I came back, I managed 77, I managed a band called Moonlight. Then I went pretty well full-time into agency work until about 10 years later, about 86, 87. Always in the back of my head, what brought me back to Australia was to find the great Australian band. And with what I'd learned in my years in Canada and the States, take a band back there. And I thought I'd found the band in Weddings, Parties, Anything. So I managed them for the first 4 albums, 86 to 90. Very, very successful. Then that finished, and I moved back to Melbourne. And we went to work for Victorian Music Festival and a few other things. I had a success in 94 when I won Sale of the Century. That was good. But then basically thought I'd drop out of the business. I'd sort of had a gut full of it, really. But while I was managing Weddings, Parties, Anything, I was also managing a band called the Gadflies and managing a guy called Jeff Lang. So when the weddings and I split up. I closed down the company in Sydney, moved back to Melbourne. And then through a strange set of circumstances, Jeff Lang came back into my life. So I thought, yep, that's a good idea. Why don't I do that? So sort of 98 through till, I'm going to say 2002, I managed Jeff Lang. And at the same time, I managed Chris Wilson. And then at the end of 2002, Xavier Rudd came into my life. But then by the middle of 2003, I'd had a gut full of management. It really, I could spend hours telling you why it's a sad and lonely profession. But yeah, that's got us through to 2002. I seriously wanted to give up the business. But then I got a phone call from a very old friend of mine called Sebastian Chase, who runs a company called MGM. And he said, look, I got a kid that's got the #1 record in the country and no one knows what to do with him. Are you interested in being involved? And I said, maybe, no, couldn't care, don't know. Anyway, I had a look. There's a guy called Joel Turner, who came out of Australian Idol, and he had this really, really big first successful rap single, I guess. And I thought, yeah, I know what to do with this. So I did that, and on the basis of that, I went and worked out of the agency Premier Artists in Melbourne for 10 years, pretty well through from 2002 to 2013. And as an agent, but I love being an agent. It's a great job. As I say, if management's a heartbreaking job, agency gives you a lot of satisfaction. It's like, then I'm at Premier. I'm working with a whole bunch of acts. People that Tony Childs joined me, Adam Brand joined me. Had big success. I should actually might jump back to 84. I'm in Melbourne. I'm running an agency called the Nucleus Agency, which was a very big agency. Midnight Oil, My Sex, Matt Finish, Metal, all the bands starting with them. Metal as anything. Anyway, and then an act came into my life called Men at Work. So they joined me the day their single went #1. So I represented them for their career until they've stopped, but 4 years later. So that was exciting. Then in 10 years ago, I guess, I realised I was doing really happy with my job at Premier, but saw all these amazing, great bands in Melbourne, such as what existed in. I keep saying in 1978, you could have bought for $200 a night Midnight Oil, My Sex, Jimmy and the Boys, Falcon, Sports, on and on. Angels. And they all went on to define Australian music. I felt that in 2013, that there was a crop of bands in Melbourne that were as exciting. So I quit Premier, started my own business, signed up all the bands, and 5 years later closed it down. It wasn't the same time. I mean, the bands were amazing, but they were the model was where they had to tour, and they all had day jobs, and they couldn't get time off, and it was so some Brothers Grimm, Cash Savage, Graveyard Train, Toot Toot Toots, Quarry Mountain Dead Rats, Howlin' Steam Train, Tiger and Me, whole 10, 15 bands that were Perch Creek Family Jug Band. All of them were amazing, but it all got too hard, and they all broke up.
Yeah, it's amazing bands you've named there that have been at the old Willie RSL. Just going back to the music scene in Melbourne and Sydney, the mid to late 60s and early 70s was such a breeding ground of new sounds and new experiences. I guess they didn't know what they were doing and everything seemed new. Do you agree with that?
Well, you know, the music scene was controlled by Melbourne up until the early 70s. You know, I mean, you had Go Set, you had the big dance scene. So bands, if they wanted to have a career, they all moved to Melbourne. You know, from Adelaide, you know, and from Sydney and from Brisbane. So and that all changed pretty well. Well, you know, the biggest thing that happened, of course, was punk. You know, 1978, when that happened, and you had all these bands. I mean, all these bands we just, you know, that were just exploding, and you know, and then the crowds followed. I mean, I can well remember, you know, the Angels would, you know, they'd been playing around for 2 or 3 years, not doing much, you know, just playing around, getting $300 a gig. And all of a sudden, one night, 600 people turned up to see them. Like, what? What? And of course, you know, the next weekend they played, different pub, same crowd. And then it started mirroring with all the other bands that were working around. And of course, then that meant that, you know, I mean, crowds means that venues will run bands. So venues that had never run bands, especially the big RSL clubs, they were quite happy to give you one night a week. Could be the Monday night because they had nothing else on. Yeah, you can have Monday night. And all of a sudden, 600 people turn up for Kevin Borich. And they went, how long has this been going on for? You know, we'll keep doing this. So, yeah, so it just doubled and tripled, you know, the business.
Pretty amazing. Yeah, you're right too. Not only did bands from interstate gravitate to Melbourne, a lot of New Zealand bands came over too. You know, you're talking about the Mike Rudds, and you mentioned Kevin Borich. You know, a lot of bands came over.
Yeah, the first band, of course, was the La-Di-Das in Sydney, and then, you know, that Leo De Castro in Melbourne. We're going back to the late 60s now, who then became, of course, Healing Force. That's the great Australian single, Golden Miles. That's a New Zealand written song and sung. So, yeah, so that, you know, that just was, you know, and the whole business was built on touring. The whole business was built on doing 6 gigs a week, every week.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as I said, that sort of became what I was good at.
Yeah.
So, you know, bands gravitated to me. I got them work. It was a good relationship, you know. Yeah, and it's you know, the bands vary some, but the point is to keep that level of work up. The bands got really good, you know, and it's interesting when you look back at the history of the great bands in the world, and you look at the Beatles and Chuck Berry and Creedence Clearwater. They all had massive amounts of time where they, you know, the Beatles were on stage 8 hours a night, 7 days a week. You know, at the end of that, you can play.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so, you know, and that's why all the Australian bands were so good live. Not so much now because they don't play so much now. But, you know, how good were the Oils and how good were Chisel and how good were In Excess? Because they were doing 6 nights a week, 300 dates a year. You've got to learn how to be good by doing that, you know.
Just a quick question back to Flying Circus. I believe you found them digs in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury area. How did that happen?
Well, what happened is we won Battle of the Sounds, and the prize in those days was a boat trip. So the American, the English boat trip, the bands had to play on the boat, like the Seekers and all that. But this was just a trip. And of course, the first place it stopped what was Hawaii, but then it stopped in San Francisco. So I flew over and went in advance to the band and got them a place to live in Haight-Ashbury, and then organised a couple of gigs for them, but then found out very quickly that they weren't going to be allowed to stay in America. So I had some contacts in Canada, and so I was able to go there. And at the time, they had a checklist of the sort of people they wanted in Canada, and 1 to 100, and musicians didn't appear on it. So at the time, the Musicians Union was really powerful in Canada. So I was able to get to the head of the Musicians Union, who went, "What? Musicians are viable people?" So he was able to convince the government to let them in. So, yeah, I mean, that's, and Toronto at the time was amazing place to play as well. Same sort of, when we got there, I mean, Rush were in the same circuit as we were playing, $300, $400 a night to play high schools. And this is when, in Australia, $400 a night was, if you look at how much bands were getting paid at Sunbury, I mean, $400 a night was a lot of money. And so, we were able to get 1 or 2 high schools a week. That was nearly $1,000. That was enormous money. We were able to live really well on that. And again, we were playing. So, unfortunately, in that time period, most of the bands that went overseas, they weren't able to get gigs. So as good as they may have been, AC/DC, Fraternity, the Masters, Doug Parkinson, these are the cream of our bands. They went over to London and they ended up staying in the bedsit because no one could get them work. So at least in Toronto, we had a good agent, and he was able to keep us working, and they were a good band. So that all rolled. And
cool. There's 2 artists I wanted to talk about, and you mentioned one before, Greg Quill. What a fantastic singer that man was.
Oh, he was a lovely man and a gentleman and a really smart man. Toronto didn't work for him as a musician, but it ended up being really successful place for him in terms of he became the entertainment editor of the Toronto Star, which is like the Melbourne Age, the big paper. So he ended up and became the most credible music journalist in Toronto, and therefore in Canada, and lived in the beautiful part of the world. Always, missed the fact that he never was able to connect musically over there, but loved the fact that he had a great lifestyle and a great career in a great city. So it all worked out,
And the other one I'd like to talk about is Jeff St. John. You did some work with him as well. Another great singer.
Oh, amazing singer. And again, a most lovely man. Again, while I'm managing Flying Circus, the other great bands that were around gravitated to me and the agency I had. And my brother at the time was a very successful A&R guy at Festival Records. So they had signed Jeff, and Jeff had moved to Sydney from Melbourne. And so, I worked with him very closely for, I guess, a couple of years. I'm going to say 70, 71. Then when I came back from Canada in 77, he didn't want to work so much, worked a bit then, but that was getting, the illness, the spinal bifida, was really starting to affect him physically. Plus, he lived a wild lifestyle. There's no problems, 2 bottles of whiskey and 40 cigarettes a day, not a problem,
That's like, you've always had a great knack of picking up on upcoming artists. What, in your opinion, what's an artist have to do to be away from the pack? What's that special thing that an artist has to have?
I don't know. I think that's the only talent I have. I think it's, I mean, I read somewhere that it's like I walk into a warehouse full of blue and white pottery and I automatically am drawn to the one piece of Ming. Um, for me, it's three things. Great songs. I mean, just basically that's really where it's got to be. If you look at, you know, the weddings or all of them have had great songs. Great live. They've all been able to play. And to me, that was sort of the two things. If you've got great songs, you make great records. And if you got great live, people want to come and see you. Didn't seem to be a, you know. And then I realized there's a third thing, what I call the broccoli ice cream theory. It doesn't matter how great the songs are and how well they play them, but if people don't like them, and it's, you know, no matter what you do, you can't sell broccoli ice cream. It doesn't matter how good it tastes or how good it is for you. People don't want it. And so that was a big lesson to learn. I learned that. I spent a lot of time with an actor. It doesn't matter who they are, but, you know, we did 4 albums and it just could not get them off the ground. But still, amazing records. And for a record company to ante up for 4 albums is, you know, back in those days was a big deal. But no, so people have got to like it. And that's sort of, you know, I mean, they used to say about Michael Gudinski that, you know, he used to walk downstairs from his office to the agency and say, who's drawing heads? And they tell him, and he'd go out to see 3 gigs. He'd see them in the city, he'd see them in the suburbs, and he'd see them at a university. And if there were 3 crowds, he said, I don't need to know anymore. Sign the act. You know, so his whole agency was, you know, whole record company was built on that. And that's why it was really successful, because it was signed on bands that people liked, you know. I mean, you know.
Yeah. Well, you did turn me on to one fantastic artist, another Canadian, Serena Ryder. And a lot of people in Australia probably don't know how good that lady is.
Yeah.
How do you keep an artist motivated if they're not getting the recognition that they should be getting?
Well, if they can't, you know, if they're not motivated to make it, well, I see you later. You know, I mean, they've got to have that thing to do. I met Serena. There's an amazing conference every year in America called Folk Alliance. And that's where I met Serena. And you're right, she was absolutely beyond description great. And so I got her to come out. You know, nothing much was happening for her in Canada. I mean, she's really young at the time, like 19, 20. And so I think I brought her out to Australia 4 times in, I'm going to say, 290, gosh almighty, mate. Let's say 2003. 2003. Yeah. And I just kept hammering her through the country. You know, she met Missy Higgins, who loved her. Missy put her on a tour. They put her on some big festivals, you know. And by then, she'd written a great song, this amazing song. And in Canada, they, you know, came out as a single, went #1. So, you know, Australia came on the back burner after that. But amazing talent. She's a big star in Canada. Never really maintained the relationship with Australia, which is unfortunate. Never really cracked it in America, but is a big star in Canada.
Yeah. She's a ripper.
She's wonderful.
Now, I'm going to, the music industry I know is a fickle one, and I want to quote and get your thoughts on this by the legendary gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson. He said, the music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs. But there's also a negative side. How did you keep the artistic needs and the business needs. That must be really difficult to do both at once.
Well, at the end of the day, it's called show business. It's not called show, let's hold a hand and walk in the park and smell flowers, and that's, and from the artist's point of view, they've still got to rent a flat and run a car, and so it has to be a business. And if you approach it from that basis, that's your job, is to manage the business. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, and at the end, we'll have a cup of coffee. Then it's also, it's really interesting because an artist I worked with very closely up until about 4 or 5 years ago, a young man called Daniel Champagne, is doing amazingly well at the moment. He just finished 72 dates across America, solo, by himself. So that's 72, that's 6 months. It's like 3 gigs a week for 6 months by himself in a car with a merch person. But by the time when him and his people in America sit back and look at it, 72, they can cut that down to 36. They did place X and did 200 people. They can go back there and do 300. So build it up, market by market, step by step, and he'll have a forever career. I mean, a forever career making as much money as he ever wants to make, but just playing shows in front of people that want to see him. The other side of it is you have to understand that this business is motivated by greed and ego. And that's just the truth. You can't, it's not a matter of saying it's a bad thing, because it's like saying it gets colder in winter. It just does. It just is. And there are people who, become jealous of whatever success, and they want it for themselves, and they're prepared to do anything to get it. And, I've had some horrifically bad situations with people based on greed and ego, and I just don't worry about it anymore. That's what you have to do to make a living. Well, off you go and do it. Yeah. Pick myself up and start again tomorrow, but it's a joy right now. I mean, I'm working, I'm doing shows at the moment with people, artists that I've known for 50 years. I mean, I was at the very first band meeting of Sherbet, right? There were 2 little bands in the agency, and they came in and said, we're going to amalgamate and we're going to call ourselves this. And we went, okay. So, it's a joy. I'm working for Daryl Braithwaite at the moment on a few shows, and it's great. It's great to know that, yes, you can have a career as long and as viable as a doctor or a lawyer or a bank manager, indeed.
Yeah, don't mention the war. We talked about, or we mentioned Chris Wilson, and you looked after him for quite a time, and I'm really proud to say Chris was a friend of mine as well. We all know he was a legendary artist, but tell me a little bit about Chris the man.
Well, without a doubt, the singularly most talented man I ever worked for, far and away, and I'll include everybody in that. An amazing talent, the most well-read person I've ever met in the music business, and we would spend hours just talking about stuff and music and stuff, and he had a real, I mean, the best band leader I've ever met. The ability to walk into a room with musicians you'd never seen before, and within half an hour having, whipped into shape. Of course, the last few years of his life, as he got sick, that was really depressing for him because, you know, he's always a big man. He's a state basketball player, you know, under 18 Victorian state basketball player. And, you know, as fit as, you know, but, you know, a man with a most immense heart, an immense love for the job and for the people, real, and for his family, really no real concern about money. But, you know, I mean, and did, you know, he's a school teacher for many years. And when he was in, you know, Paul Kelly's band, they'd go on tour in America and he would go over and tour in the school holidays and come home, you know, because it was, you know, and then he was very close to his mother. He took a year off and looked after her, the last year of her life. And so, you know, he was just the best. I mean, on every level, personally, professionally, intelligently, musically, the best. I'm proud that he was a friend of mine.
He was, mate. He was one of a kind.
Yep.
And you are still active, obviously, in the music industry through obviously a love of music. I've only been doing little part-time things with Way Out West. I'm a nervous wreck on gig day, you know, if the crowd's going to show up and all that sort of stuff. How do you manage all that?
Well, I still am. Of course, you know, it's somewhat moved by the fact now that most shows have pre-sales. So you're not standing there waiting for the first person and saying, has it worked? You at least know you've got 100, 200, 300 pre-sales, so you know you're okay. But no, still all that time, still, you know, yeah, and you should be. You know, I think it's a prerequisite of the job that, you know, you should be thinking of, you know. But I work on a theory that an old promoter taught me many, many years ago. He said, do everything that you can think of, and then one or two things will happen. It's a success and you're a genius, or it fails, but then you never do it again. Because nothing's worse than the morning after a show that had been a failure going, you know, if only I'd just done radio, television, posters, something, and you go and do it again and it fails again, you go, oh, no, so do everything, you know, and then most times if you do everything, you got a half-assed chance of pulling it off, you know.
I know you have some incredible stories. I think I spoke to you once that you should be writing a book. And some of your stories are probably too spicy to air. But have you got one famous, believe it or not, moment that you could relate to us?
I'll tell you a story. And it's really interesting because it reflects on a whole bunch of things. So 1977, I've come back from Canada, and I'm starting to get back involved in the business. And so Sebastian Chase, who I mentioned before, he's managing the band called Dragon. So I thought I'd go out and see them. And they were playing in Avalon RSL, which is a venue about, I don't know, 20 mile north of Sydney, the Northern Beaches. So I go there to see them at, you know, 9 o'clock or something. And what I didn't know is they'd done the Avalon RSL early, and then they'd driven in to do a show at the Bondi Lifesaver late. So I'd missed them. So what they had is the support act on. Okay, you know, here I am, I watch them. And they were Midnight Oil. And Peter had longish hair, balding, but longish hair, and he was playing keyboard. So I was really early in their career. Anyway, so I've talked myself into the gig, and there I am. And all of a sudden, this guy comes over and he introduces himself. He said, I'm Gary Morris, I'm in this band. What do you think? I said, oh, yeah, they're all right. He said, no. He said, the greatest band in the world. I said, mate, they're good. They're an unknown support band. I get you dig it, and you're the manager. He said, no, we're going to change the world. We're going to change absolutely the way the world looks at music. And I've got my back up and I'm thinking, who in the hell are you telling me this? I said, no, you're going to end up working for Gadinsky and Chug because that's the way the business works. No, we'll never do that. Well, I don't know. Anyway, we had this huge screaming argument on the steps leading up to the venue. And I ran into him about 10 years ago, and he still remembers that. Because, what the hell? They went out and they changed the way the music business ran on every level. And I've learned a lot from working with that band. I mean, the most important thing is that they didn't really know what to do. What they did know is what not to do. So if they took out all the options that they didn't want to do, that by its nature should leave them with 3 or 4 or 5 to do. So, they were, one of the great gigs they ever did was they played if you remember, Bombay Rock at a stage, and at the other end was the VIP section. And of course, Bombay Rock was after them for years and years to play there, and they kept turning it down. And I was their agent, and they kept saying, well, why don't you see if we can play the VIP section and the VIPs can be on the stage and we can make fun of them. I said, I'll give it a shot. So I went in to see Gadinsky and I said, that's the story. And he went, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Turned the club on its head. They played the VIP section. The VIPs had to sit on the stage and people could look at them. And again, it was, biggest dickers. My dick's bigger than yours, but sometimes that's an important part of the business,
Sensational, John. That's about all I've got. I just wanted to let our listeners know that, John, you've been a great friend of mine and helped me a lot. I mean, we've Way Out West been going 23 years. I got no idea what I was doing. I still probably don't. But you always had a little guiding voice for me or a few ideas, and I so much appreciate you being part of Way Out West history. And also, you've arranged for one of our favourite artists that we've been busting our ass to get for years, and Dave Hole, who's going to come over in the new year. So once again, thank you so much, John, for being a friend and a mentor to me as well.
Mate, listen, you give me 5 Rob Rose, I'll rule the world. There are many people in this business who are enthusiasts, right? And that's really important. That's like probably the most important thing. But there are very few enthusiasts that can colour it in. It's okay having the idea, but then, the ability. And the point is that, you and your mob of enthusiasts over there in Williamstown have created this really special little enclave that, as you well know, musicians love. And you treat them with such respect and such admiration that it flows. And that's why it works. I know what you've done personally to help musicians over the last 20 or 30 years. So, anything that I could do is minimal in terms of what you've been able to do. But no, and mate, there's still some great acts out there. I'm working with 2 or 3 at the moment. The biggest problem is to get, because the business has changed so much, because people aren't going to pubs anymore to see bands, how you get momentum with somebody, but, I'm still involved in 2 or 3 small acts. But the trouble is I can't probably get more than 4 or 5 shows a year for them. It's depressing, but they don't want to turn up and play Place X in front of nobody. Place X doesn't want to pay them a bunch of money with nobody coming, so you're in this. So it's really hard. But if you ever want to do someone new that I will give you 100% guarantee for, just let me know. All right.
Oh yeah, we're in for it, mate.
I'll set you up. All right.
Thanks,
all
John.
Right,
Thanks,
fun.
mate.
I look forward to. So I'll see you on the 17th of March with Dave Hole.
Yeah, cool.
And we've got 2 or 3 more things to talk about, which we'll talk about soon. All right.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it, mate.
See ya.
Bye.